Sonic the Hedgehog is known for a long lineage of quality handheld titles. Even when the main console entries faltered or were outright broken, you could always count on the games on the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo DS to at least be a fun time that harkened back to the classics on the Sega Genesis. When Nintendo launched the 3DS in 2011, it was natural to assume that the system would receive a string of quality Sonic titles, especially since the Sonic series was on the rise in terms of quality at the time with Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations. However, when looking back at all the platformers the Sonic series had in the 3DS, Sonic Generations, Sonic Lost Worlds, Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal, and Sonic Boom Fire and Ice, it is quite noticeable how all these games weren't good for various reasons. And I spent 3 videos documenting that fact in 2022, and today I've decided to compile all that effort into one video for the viewers, with some extra bits put in for those who have chosen to watch these videos again. But before we dive into it with Sonic Generations, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Valerie, the maker of these really cool cushioned armrests, designed specifically to help gamers eliminate bad posture. Every game player has had one of those days where you're playing Project Sonic 06 or some other game of comparable or lesser quality where you have been playing for hours and hours when you're hunched over and in my case resting your arms on a hardwood desk. That just gets uncomfortable after some time. Maybe your finger might fall asleep or something like that. Perhaps you play games on the couch and you'll be all hunched over, wrecking your posture. And that is where Valerie comes in. Once you take the pillow out of the box, you slap the cover on it, and once you do that, you're right as rain to rack up combo points as Shadow in Project 06 at lightning speed, all the while feeling totally comfortable to sit back in your chair while your controller is placed on the cushion that sits in your lap. It's genius. Also works if you're someone who only plays games on the couch. You can absorb the atmosphere of the latest and greatest games while comfortably sitting back. Either way, it's a real advancement in your gaming experience. To enhance your own gaming comfort with a Valerie cushion, use my code Jay'sReviews and get 15% off your entire order today. Having said that, thanks to Valerie for sponsoring this video. And now we may get back to your regularly scheduled programming. The Nintendo 3DS is a pretty popular handheld. It was first released back in 2011, and despite stumbling out of the gate at first, it picked up steam pretty quick and had a strong 6-year run before the Nintendo Switch dropped back in 2017. The 3DS sold almost 80 million units, which might be lower than the 150 million units its predecessor, the DS, sold, but achieving half the sales of a juggernaut like the DS and being a massive success in your own right is certainly nothing to scoff at, especially compared to how Nintendo's console division dropped the ball with the Wii U in 2012, compared to the money-printing original Wii. The 3DS is a pretty popular console, however it's never really been my go-to. I have a lot of experience with my 3DS, having owned both the original model and the new 3DS XL model, and I got a ton of playtime with them as I'd gotten into great games in the console like its roster of Zelda games for example, or replaying old favorites through its DS backwards compatibility. The Ace Attorney series is where I got the most playtime out of my 3DS back when I first got those games, but of course that's a story for another day. My point is just that the system is great, it just doesn't rank on my list of favorites like, well, every PlayStation console would. What can I say? I'm pretty damn biased. My point is also that I like to share my memories with the specific consoles I talk about in these Sonic videos, and the 3DS is no different. It had 4 completely original Sonic platformers, and before the year is up, I'm going to be talking about all of them. Starting with the release Sonic Generations got for it in 2011. Sonic Generations for the 3DS was developed by DIMS, the company who was responsible for making new Sonic platformers in the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo DS when those were new. However, starting with Sonic Unleashed, Sega found a new use for DIMS. They had DIMS develop a Wii and PS2 version of Sonic Unleashed, based on what Sonic Team was making for the PS3 and Xbox 360 back in 2008. This was a clear success as Unleashed was able to reach every major console, and by doing a new game based on the same idea, they didn't have to worry about porting the massive HD version to the Wii, it's just a different game with the same name. So when Sonic Team did Sonic Colors for the Wii in 2010, DIMS was tasked with doing a port to the DS, and so when it was time for Sonic Generations, it was once again DIMS' job to take the idea, classic Sonic and modern Sonic traversing through levels of previous Sonic games and adapting it for the 3DS. DIMS has a pretty negative reputation amongst Sonic fans, and I honestly feel like that's not being very fair to them. If you watch my videos on their stuff, in fact I recommend watching my video on the Sonic Rush games before this if you haven't, that's where I cover Colors DS, you'd know that I don't think their output was perfect across the board, but many of these games are good, just with a lot of flaws. Sonic Colors in the DS is actually one of their best, a solid 2D platformer from start to finish that even some prefer over the Wii version of Sonic Colors. So naturally, you'd hope Generation 3DS could turn out just as good, however it unfortunately did not. Where Generation 3DS went wrong as a game on its own, a version of the masterful console generations, a sequel to the DS Sonic Rush trilogy, and all that is what we're here to discuss today. So let's dive into it. One of the things people preferred about Sonic Colors in the DS was how it told the story. It was the same plot with Dr. Eggman's Interstellar Amusement Park, however Colors on DS did much more work to bring it to life by populating the park with other Sonic characters that you would interact with and do side quests for, even referencing previous games in those moments. In addition to that, the Chaos Emeralds played a part in the story by allowing Sonic to turn into Super Sonic at the end to battle the rogue Mother Wisp. If fans were hoping the story of Generations on 3DS would receive the same treatment, you'll be disappointed. The plot is still that classic Sonic is pulled into a void by a monster, as is modern Sonic at his birthday party, and the two Sonics and two Tailses have to go from level to level to bring back the world that is now a white void, and it's revealed that Eggman and his past self were behind it, just like the console game. But the thing is, the story of the console Generations wasn't even that good. It was easily the worst part of an otherwise amazing game. Nothing happened for most of its runtime, and the dialogue felt really out of place and poorly written. The references were kept to an absolute minimum, and on 3DS, it's even worse. The production values here are pretty low. I mean, the mirror scene from the original game still takes place in a white background, and they put up a picture of the console cutscene to make sure you know what's going on. And they portray action through flashing colors and models moving across the screen. Sometimes it's genuinely difficult to tell what's going on here since it's more bare bones than what's on consoles. I only know because I've played the original game so many times. I feel like an easy remedy for cutscenes like this, or the time eater reveal, would be by compressing the original cutscenes. Colors on DS had compressed scenes from the Wii game, and Generations already made its opening, its ending, and the pre-final boss reveal cutscenes pre-rendered, so compress that and fit it on 3DS. I have no reason to think that was something beyond the 3DS's capabilities. The other characters don't even get the cameos they got in the console Generations, it's just the Sonics and the Tailses standing around talking about running fast, like there's no tomorrow, or there won't be a tomorrow, and other junk. They also spam this one cutscene track from the original Generations in almost every scene, including the time eater reveal. Seriously, making the console Generations look like it has a cool story is an impressive feat. But hey, I completely forgave the console Generations for its story because of the gameplay, the important part. So how does the 3DS version compare? Let's start with Classic Sonic, like we did in the last review. Credit where credit is due, this version of Classic Sonic is technically more accurate to the one on the Genesis than what was in the console version. I really don't know how that happened, considering that this is 1 year after the release of Sonic 4 Episode 1 from DIMS, which was one of the worst Classic Sonic approximations in series history. But in Generations 3DS, Classic Sonic gains speed when rolling down hills and all that good, classic-y stuff people like. Although this slope in Casino Night felt pretty jank. When Sonic picked up speed in the Genesis, you really felt it, but here, it's happening, but looks like nothing is changing. You don't feel that increase in speed, but that's just my mind. Not really tangible. Overall, even if this is a better translation of the old mechanics, I would never say that a choice players have to make is more accuracy on 3DS or the better game on console, because I find what was in the console Generations to be more fun anyway. On 3DS, you can't do the super-powered spin dash where you press one button and send Classic Sonic flying. Maybe it's OP, maybe it's not how it was in 16-bit, but I feel like that kind of crazy speed and power was just more fun. It was something that set Generations Classic Sonic gameplay apart from other 2D Sonic games, when here, you have a good recreation of what the old games played like, but it's ultimately dull because of the levels. And hey, what's up with this? I was told this game had physics, and this box is flying in mid-air? 0 out of 10. With this being a 2D platformer from start to finish, you may be wondering, how is modern Sonic different from classic? Well, Generations 3DS is basically the fourth Sonic Rush game. Colors on DS directly being the third one for those in the back. Modern Sonic plays similarly to how he did in Colors DS, in that he has the ability to stomp, slide, and wall jump, moves created for Sonic Unleashed that got brought into the Rush games with Colors DS. Although Modern Sonic has to unlock the stomp in this game when he had it by default in Colors DS. One of the main mechanics from the Rush series that stays intact with Modern Sonic here is that by filling your boost gauge, it will temporarily be unlimited as you blow through enemies before it starts to deplete. That's basically the only Rush mechanic that stays in Generations 3DS. The dual screen dynamic from the first 3 games is gone here. Instead, the action is locked to the top screen, as the bottom screen is where you see a line showing how close you are to the end of the stage. I know it sounds really bad to have 2 styles of 2D Sonic in one game, especially because Modern Sonic's 2D segments in the other generations was easily the worst part of the game. But if they leaned into that Sonic Rush gameplay more, I think this could have been an interesting showcase on how much 2D Sonic had evolved over the years. I'm thinking the trick system totally should have come back for this game. In Colors DS, it made sense to remove the whole trick system because tricks refilled the boost gauge in the first 2 Rush games, and in Colors Wii, the whole point was that White Wisps did it. so Color's DS had to include that mechanic. Generation's 3DS does it like the console version, where rings are the main method of boost gauge refilling. It hit me while playing how much more exciting a trick system would have been in segments like this where you go through these rings, because trick combos, especially in Rush Adventure with the star system, added a lot of excitement to the moment-to-moment gameplay and made the whole thing feel more stylish. So it could have been a really cool dynamic where there's this traditional classic Sonic and then modern Sonic's doing flips and tricks to get more points through the stages while boosting through enemies. As it stands, you have a basic classic Sonic and a modern Sonic who blows through enemies faster and occasionally plays with the camera perspective more. It's just lame. Part of why I can't really discuss the playable characters that much is because the levels they run around in leave much to be desired. When you start the game, you might notice that some things feel pretty familiar. That's because for the first 3 levels, Green Hill, Casino Night, and Mushroom Hill, classic Sonic stages are lifted straight out of the Genesis originals, every aspect of them. It's a one-to-one transition instead of making new levels from the ground up, making these the best designed levels in the game, because besides that, I thought the level design here was very weak. As soon as the classic era is over, classic Sonic unlocks the homing attack, something you'd get in the console version for collecting all the red rings in each stage. Here, it's a required mechanic. The lamest level design trope in all of 2D Sonic especially is a row of enemies that exist to be homing attack fodder. Sonic 4 was very guilty of this. I think they unlocked the homing attack for classic Sonic because that's the easiest way to design a stage, homing attack chains. And so, once they stopped reusing level maps from the original games and had no choice but to make new ones, the level design for classic Sonic went down the drain. For both characters, I thought the original stages were a mess. The upper routes were still the faster ones and all that, but then things would fly on screen faster than the speed of sound. You just have to expect that and react accordingly. But this was something that got on my nerves the more I played, because the levels didn't feel cohesive. It just felt like some new chaotic element was being introduced every couple of seconds. Like this part of Mushroom Hill as modern Sonic, where I went from boosting and now I'm bouncing and now I'm boosting and then I'm climbing on walls and then I'm boosting again and suddenly flying through the air. The stages all just feel like a complete mess in this game. This being something I felt throughout the entire adventure, minus the stages stolen from the original games. Even the roster of stages and bosses feel like a dartboard in this game. Like the console game, the 3DS version is divided into different eras, the Genesis era, the Dreamcast era, and the modern era, but this was once again a massive amount of missed potential, as the fans were told in pre-release that Generations was going to be used as an opportunity to pay homage to Sonic's handheld history, but in execution it barely does that. I mean, in the classic era, we get Green Hill from the 16-bit Sonic 1, Casino Night from the 16-bit Sonic 2, and Mushroom Hill from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. The rival battles against Metal Sonic from Sonic CD, and the bosses against the Big Arm mech from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Big Arm is a really cool choice for a boss, definitely worth it for the remix of the track alone. All the music in this game is great, except Radical Highway Act 2, that was an atrocity. And it's also really lame that Water Palace and Tropical Resort only get one remix. Act 1 just reuses the music from the original Colors and the Sonic Rush album, and then calls it a day. But as I was saying, in the Dreamcast era, we get Emerald Coast from Sonic Adventure, Radical Highway from Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow as a rival battle, and the Bio Lizard as a boss fight. The 3DS version only has 7 stages instead of 9, one for each Chaos Emerald as you play through these Sonic Heroes-inspired special stages that are some of the easiest in the franchise. You don't even have to do anything to unlock them besides beating both acts of the zone. But anyway, by pulling from games that were already on the console version of Generations, the stage roster of the 3DS version just feels like sloppy seconds compared to the main course of the console version. It's not that these are bad picks, but Chemical Plant, Speed Highway, and City Escape are just much better than what was on the 3DS. Radical Highway was literally a shadow stage in SA2, which just feels weird to bring back like this. But it's the modern era where the game starts to make good on its promises of using handheld levels, as we play Water Palace from Sonic Rush and Tropical Resort from the DS version of Sonic Colors. You can tell because it uses the Burst Wisp for classic Sonic, which was exclusive to the DS version, and when modern Sonic uses the Laser Wisp, it's the audio sample from the DS version. But then the bosses are another mess. It's Silver from Sonic 06 and the Egg Emperor from Sonic Heroes. So the modern era has 2 stages from DS games and a boss from Sonic Heroes and a boss from Sonic 06. Sonic Heroes, a game that was literally included in the Dreamcast era of the console version. So there goes cohesion. Really, all of this goes to show that Generations 3DS was nothing more than a cheap tie-in game with a very low budget. I can't imagine why they'd reuse whole stages from original games, reuse music whenever they can, have the rival battle just be glorified Sonic Rivals stages that have nothing to do with the characters in question, and have this slapdash stage roster for any conceivable reason other than Sega just not giving Dimps the time and resources to really make something special here. Even with the kind of mediocre mechanics and stage layouts, a full tribute towards the history of the handheld Sonic games would have gone a long way towards giving this game more staying power. But I didn't want to stop there. The review is basically done now, but while conceiving this video, I thought it would be interesting to share what I thought would make for a cool Generations 3DS stage roster, but then I decided to allow my patrons to get in on the action via a Google form, as they discussed their picks in the Patreon-only Discord server. So the rest of the video will be dedicated to this little experiment between me and my patrons. If you want to share your thoughts, I say listen to the next few minutes of me talking and then take the Google form in the description below and share your rationale on why you picked the stages you did in the comments below. Now, I set up the poll as follows. It was being assumed that this new version of Generations 3DS went the full mile with 9 stages from 3 eras of handheld Sonic. So we started with the Game Gear. Voters had to choose one stage from the 8-bit Sonic 1, one stage from the 8-bit Sonic 2, and then between the other 3 platformers, Chaos, Triple Trouble, and Blast, they had to pick one from these 3 to be the 3rd stage. Personally, I picked Green Hill for Sonic 1. I thought that would be the way to tie the 2 versions together since Generations' promotional material was all clad in Green Hill imagery. But the 8-bit Sonic 1 has a lot of unique ideas that the voters resonated with, like 9 votes for the iconic Bridge Zone, and 6 votes for Jungle Zone, and even 2 votes for Sky Base Zone. But 9 people agreed with me in having Green Hill be the stage. The 8-bit Sonic 2 was a bit more divisive, as I picked Underground Zone simply because it's such a challenging opening stage for this 2D Sonic platformer, but the game had a lot of levels to choose from, Sky High Zone being pretty iconic with the hang glider mechanic, which is why it got 7 votes. 4 votes for Aqua Lake, 1 for Green Hills Zone, 4 for Gimmick Mountain, and 3 for Scrambled Egg Zone. For the 3rd stage, I put the levels of Sonic Blast in as a joke just to see if anyone would pick it, and the answer is no. No votes for a Blast stage. Over half the votes went to Sunset Park from Triple Trouble, probably for that Act 3 music. But then Robotnik Winter got some votes too, Sleeping Egg Zone from Sonic Chaos getting the most votes past that at 2 votes. I didn't include bosses here because I thought it would get complicated to have to vote on each and every handheld boss, but to toss my 2 cents in, I think Knack the Weasel will be a good rival battle for the Game Gear games. Not better than Metal Sonic, but since he's in the console version, I thought it would be good to have something different. And of course, for the boss fight, I had to pick the comedically difficult final boss from Sonic Chaos that drained all my continues in the first playthrough. Next up, patrons had to vote on the stages from the Game Boy Advance era. This one was simple as the only choices were from the Sonic Advance trilogy. From Sonic Advance 1, I had voted for Egg Rocket, a stage where you had to fight against the timer going down as you make your way up the facility, as it's just a really cool set piece and definitely the most standout stage of Sonic Advance, an otherwise pretty straightforward game. Although it was actually Secret Base Zone, the second level that stole most of the votes. It does have some catchy music, so I see it. I think any level besides Neo Green Hill is a good choice for Gen's 3DS. From Advance 2, it was no contest. Music Plant got 66.7% of the vote, which includes mine. Advance 2 is home to some pretty interesting themes, but Music Plant stands tall amongst them with its music-themed stage hazards and enemies. There'd be so much potential for a bringback of this stage. Still though, some voted for Ice Paradise, Hot Crater, Sky Canyon, and Techno Base. Advance 3 is an interesting game because all of its levels, besides Sunset Hill Zone, are home to interesting concepts. I voted for Chaos Angel since it's a really climactic stage, but Route 99, the opening of the game, had the most votes. But Cybertrack wasn't far behind. For this era's rival battle, I think Emerald from Sonic Battle is an easy choice, being an iconic part of the series and his story continuing into Sonic Advance 3. For the boss, it could be a lot of things, but the final Eggman mech of Advance 3 sticks in my mind in this case. Redoing the final battle against Gemerald from Advance 3 would also suffice. Lastly, we had the DS era. Sonic Rush was home to many interesting stages as well. My vote going to Water Palace, a great pick that Generations already had in its roster, which is where 63% of the vote went. Night Carnival and Leaf Storm being tied with Huge Crisis and Mirage Road being behind those 2. Rush Adventure was all over the place with Haunted Ship taking an overwhelming majority of the votes, but second place was my vote for Pirates Island. I think that stage has so many great elements to pick from, like riding on a dolphin under the water or launching on catapults. It's a really cool stage. And lastly, there was Sonic Colors on the DS. This one is interesting because the Wii version of Colors got a stage in the console generations, so I avoided Planet Wisp, even it's one of the most iconic levels from Colors. Tropical Resort being the box art stage, and that's what it got in Generations 3DS. I feel like both of these stages have the issue where neither one is that climactic as a final stage, so assuming neither Generations has a final stage, I decided to vote for Asteroid Coaster since that would be a challenging way for the game to go out, even being able to make use of DS version exclusives like the Skull Chase or the Void Wisp. And that is where most of the votes fell, with Starlight Carnival in second place. One patron had said they didn't want there to be a Colors DS stage, instead making room for a Sonic Rivals stage. And while those games are home to some neat gimmicks like Coliseum Highway or Death Yard Zone, I think the rival battles are enough of an homage to the game Sonic Rivals. And I wanted to make the stage list cohesive and divided by console, Game Gear, GBA, and DS. So there's that. For the bosses, I think it's pretty clear that Blaze would be the rival character, debuting in Sonic Rush, and for the boss, why not the Nega Wisp armor from Color's DS? This is assuming that the boss fight doesn't get reused in Lost World and Forces, of course. And that's that. The last several minutes don't really add anything important to the video, but I thought it would be neat to generate some conversation on my Discord regarding how Generations 3DS could have been improved. Like I said, the 3DS game with unremarkable level design and okay mechanics would have been a lot better if it used Game Gear and GBA stages alongside the DS ones it did use. The game would stand on its own 2 feet as a celebration of handheld Sonic. But as it stands, it really is just the cheaper, inferior generations for 3DS users. A game I'm probably not going to play again anytime soon because it just feels like a filler game made to satisfy a space on a release schedule, which sucks. Today, the only thing people ever really say about the 3DS version of Generations is that it has better physics for classic Sonic and a much better rendition of the final boss, the Time Eater, when it was abysmal in the console version. But since the 3DS version could have been so much more, you just wonder what could have been if it was given more time and budget. Could have been one of Dimps' best Sonic games, but as it stands, it's an entirely serviceable game that you play for 90 minutes as a distraction and then you're done with it. It has extra content for sure, but nothing I'd ever bother engaging with. I guess it was nice that you can fill in how long you've been a Sonic fan for on these cards. I'm pretty sure it's 2004 for me, which is a modest 7 years ago back when Generations came out, and now it's... yeah, that. But yeah, that's basically all I ever had to say about Sonic Generations and the 3DS, but before we move on, I figured I'd take the chance to talk about that poll that was put into the video. If you want to get in on it, it's still open to this day, so I'll include the link in the description. But the version of it presented in the video was merely with the Patreon audience at the time of upload in May of 2022. Since that video had such a large audience originally, I figured I'd include the results because at time of writing, the poll got over 1,000 participants. Not a lot of the winning picks had changed, but to go over it, the YouTube audience decided the best 8-bit Sonic 1 stage was still Green Hill, Sky High Zone overtook Underground Zone from 8-bit Sonic 2 as the pick, and between Chaos, Triple Trouble, and Blast, Sunset Park still won in a landslide. Though Sonic Blast stages did receive votes in the end. 110 of them, in fact. You know who you are. Sonic Advance 1 looked pretty much identical even with more votes. Secret Base still came out on top. Same for Advance 2 with Music Plant. Advance 3 had more of a spread in the end, but Route 99 still won. Sonic Rush still had Water Palace get a majority of the vote, Haunted Ship from Rush Adventure still won, but with a significantly reduced percentage, and then Asteroid Coaster from Color's DS still won. Thanks to everyone who participated and will continue to do so in the future. Now back to the video. This compilation is only regarding platformers and original ones at that. I'm not going to talk about the 3D eShop port of Sonic 1 or 3DS version of the Olympics or racing games because I've never played them. This means that the next Sonic platformer on 3DS is Sonic Lost World, a game that is quite bad compared to the mediocre Generations 3DS, and even compared to the Lost World on Wii U that I already didn't like that much. Lost World being a game that, on console, was very underwhelming, both at the time of its release and to this day. I feel better about Lost World than I used to, but not in a way to where I have anything super nice to say about it. It's a finished game, and in fact might be the most polished 3D Sonic game of all time, but it just didn't capture the imagination much. Not that this should be a requirement for the game to be good, but man, that game was bland. Now, Lost World on Wii U is a game I've played a couple times since it was released almost 10 years ago on Wii U, but its alternative on the 3DS is actually one I've never played before. For starters, by age 13, the need to digest every alternative version of the new Sonic game was really lowered. Secondly, I never heard good things about this one. Sonic Lost World on 3DS is definitely one of the most infamous Sonic games of the last 10 years, being one that most fans regard as a waste of potential and a frustrating one at that via its numerous baffling design choices. Before it came out, people were interested in trying this one because it was going to be the first 3D Sonic game released on a handheld, something Generations on 3DS, or even the Sonic Rivals games on PSP before this could have done, but opted not to. So the 3DS version of Lost World was trying something new, but I never had an opinion on it because of the fact that I never played it. All I could tell was that it didn't look particularly fun in what I saw from the Let's Plays and reviews coming out for Lost World at the time. And I already didn't like the Wii U version anyway, so an even worse Lost World was something I especially didn't need to experience. When comparing Lost World on console to the handheld version, it's interesting to note how we don't have that much to talk about besides the gameplay and level design, because in most other respects it lines up with the console counterpart. Each world still has 4 levels to play in, all of those worlds are the exact same as the console original, and the story is also one-to-one with the Wii U game as well. This game just uses and heavily compresses the cutscenes from the console version and then plays them at their respective moments in the story. I guess this goes to show that the developers at Dimps had a better grasp on the 3DS hardware since, like I said when talking about Generations 3DS, that game used none of the 360 cutscenes, instead reinterpreting the story like Colors on DS had done. Although maybe it was just easier to use the cutscenes from Lost World on Wii U because those were already pre-rendered video files anyway, so therefore it's a compression upon a compression when the cutscenes in Generations were mostly in-engine, so they'd have to compress them from there. Still, it doesn't quite make sense why they didn't use the pre-rendered scenes that the console Generations had for its handheld release, but that's neither here nor there at this point. In terms of the gameplay, Lost World 3DS technically plays like the console version. Sonic still has 3 speeds controlled by a run button. He uses parkour in almost the same fashion as the console game, only now spin dashing keeps your momentum going forward rather than moving upwards. Parkour in general is used much more often in dedicated segments as opposed to the console game where it was optional more than half the time. And in terms of combat, Sonic's kick attack is a ranged move rather than something you get up close and do, which I think better distinguishes the homing attack from the kick anyway. But the best element of all would be the spin dash. I said I found it satisfying to do in the console version, but found it annoying how landing from a double jump canceled the spin dash, when a spin dash with the infinite duration combined with the distance of the double jump would have been fun to use. In Lost World 3DS, this is actually how it works. So I have to say I was pleasantly surprised to see that, and felt it was as fun to use as I had anticipated. But the trade-off with this is that Sonic handles much worse on the ground than he did on Wii U. In that version, Sonic moved very stiffly when turning, and it was pretty awkward. But on the 3DS, they instead made Sonic fly in whatever direction you were turning in while running, which makes precise movement while going fast a real nightmare. Therefore, walking becomes much more useful in Lost World 3DS than it was on Wii U, where I almost never went at the lowest speed. Lost World 3DS is an interesting game to compare to the console version since it, in many ways, takes everything I didn't like about the Wii U game and makes it far worse. For example, the combat. I thought the kick attack and the charged homing attack only served to slow the pace down on Wii U, but on 3DS it's even worse since numerous stages will have a big mini-boss that requires you to wait around for their attacks to be completed before you can stun them and then wait for the charged homing attack to fully power up, which takes even longer than it did in Sonic Team's version. The multi-homing attack also gets you into trouble frequently because it will target enemies and objects that aren't even in your line of sight, which puts you at the risk of taking damage or dying, like this glorious moment from a 2D segment in Frozen Factory. Yeah, what an idiot I am for my inability to predict that. Then the handheld game takes the gimmicky aspect of the original and ramps that up to 11 as well. I feel like the task of creating a 3D Sonic platformer on the 3DS wasn't something so unachievable that they needed to pad the game out the way they did, but regardless, you spend several levels across the campaign doing miscellaneous tasks, like solving puzzles where you lead balls into slots and then kick them so the ball is stunned, leaving it in place for you to make it through the door that's open now. Repeat the process 14 more times. That was a sentence. Or pushing a snowball in the snow until it grows big enough to hold down a switch or fit into a slot. Repeat the process 20 more times while being chased by a killer snowball. Or solve a maze where you get teleported to random spots, making it so you have to find which teleport is the real one. Riding on a missile with gyro controls for an entire level. Pushing fruits onto switches to teleport said fruits onto this elevator with a blender that you push the fruit into that rises the platform higher and higher. That was another sentence I definitely just said. Hopefully you get the picture. The game is more random than the console version, and that's because it's an onslaught of not even mini-games, but just objectives that have nothing to do with the fast-paced action platforming. And it gets very repetitive very fast. Lost World on 3DS takes things I didn't like on Wii U and made them worse, like I said, and alternatively, it takes things I didn't like and then flips them on its head and makes the experience even worse in the process. For example, I thought the wisps were pretty shoehorned into Lost World on Wii U. On 3DS, you better get used to them because they're everywhere. Entire stages that are solely based on controlling wisp powers, like a 3D underwater drill wisp I could barely get the hang of, or a 3D asteroid wisp you need to absorb materials with in order to get big enough to damage a mini-boss or do tight platforming with, or swinging on poles with the lightning wisp, or worst of all, trying to carefully maneuver the gyro-controlled quake wisp that kept going whichever way it felt and often sent me plummeting into the abyss. You need this stomp ability the Quake Wisp has to hit these switches, but that's not a move you use with a button. It's only done when activating the transformation, so you need to wait it out for the bar to deplete and then grab another one, or realize you can cancel the transformation with this life icon in the bottom screen. Very intuitive stuff. The bosses are also flipped on their head, as in the console game you could clear them in 2 seconds, but here it takes several minutes. Some of those are just because of animations and attack phases going on for too long, like gathering the materials as the Asteroid Wisp to attack Zomom or aiming for Zor, but others are just because the game is not remotely telegraphing what's going on, like how the boss with Zik just completely changes the controls to be a full 360 rotation with the analog stick, which, fun fact, made me think my controls were broken for a second. Or the boss with Xena where I could barely move without the janky aiming of the lightning wisp screwing with me.
The game just has dreadful boss encounters and makes you miss the fights from the console version of Lost World. And on top of all that, the game introduces new problems and headaches to the Lost World experience that are completely separate from the console version. Like, the game still has 2D levels, but now you move so quickly through them that you can barely see what's coming in front of you, so you'll crash into obstacles and enemies left and right. Especially since you can't roll into a ball in this game while on the move. By collecting 50 rings and reaching the end of the stage, you gain access to a special stage, these being almost unanimously agreed upon as the worst special stages in Sonic history. The concept is that you have to collect multicolored spheres like you did in Colors DS, but this time you control Sonic in a full Star Fox all-range mode map, but with the 3DS's gyro features. Since I played this game on the 3DS emulator, I set it up with the DualShock 4, which has gyro compatibility, so this was plenty awkward at first. But the basic gist of it is that you move around with the controller itself, and when you need to recenter, you stop moving with the triangle button and then recenter the controller yourself. No way to adjust the camera or Sonic's position or anything. Once you figure that out, you can get through a few of these stages, but again, it's really awkward and unintuitive. And if you're playing on a real 3DS, you'll spin and rotate around looking like a complete moron. How anyone is supposed to play like this when on a bus or if you're a kid in the back seat is beyond me. I gave up at Special Stage 5 because the patterns the spheres were in, combined with the short time limit, just made it a nightmare to play that might just give you motion sickness. But the flaws don't end there. The 3DS game still has only 4 levels per world, and one of them is just a boss fight. So with 3 real levels per world, how does the game make space for all these gimmicks they repeat over and over? Well, the answer is making the levels go on for eons.
You might spend 5 minutes getting lost in the maze of desert ruins, but then spend 10 more minutes dodging lasers and fighting mini-bosses until the stage finally relents and just ends.
This being a game-wide issue where levels, whether they be standard platforming or some bizarre gimmick, just overstay their welcome to the max.
It seriously took me over 18 minutes just to clear the first 2 zones of Frozen Factory,
because it was like 4 levels rolled into one. Standard gameplay, snowboarding, switch puzzles, 2D elevator rides, like, did they think that was overkill? Did this game have to be 5.5 hours? Generations 3DS lasted only 2. And even if you didn't know what you were doing, a skilled player could clear that game in a day because it's very simplistic. That game felt undercooked and should have had more meat in its bones by maybe 30 minutes. But this game is just a marathon. Every zone I said out loud, well, at least I'm through the worst of it. And then my friends laughed at me because every single one introduced some crazy new gimmick that really stretches that playtime out. The game gives you 15 minutes to clear Silent Forest Zone 1, and I timed out. In the end, taking 23 minutes to beat the stage. If you're creating a ticking clock for a Sonic game and you even need it to go towards 20 minutes, I feel like that's when you should be taking a step back and asking yourself if that was really needed. And here's the thing, I'm sure with a second playthrough, Lost World 3DS would be much easier to play. I've seen examples of that on the channel just recently, but I think this argument is a slippery slope. I find a lot of reward in getting better at games and finding them way easier as a result. So many of my videos have discussed that effect. However, what makes this a slippery slope when considering my thoughts on a game is that this is true for every game. Just look at my video on Sonic 06. One of the core points was that as a kid, I played the game so often that I'm just adjusted to the crap factor, so therefore I won't have a super terrible time with it. However, I don't say, and never said, it was a good game, because when looking at its execution of the most basic elements of game design, it flopped. But even off-screen, games I used to say negative things about in passing are games I've found enjoyment in when playing them again. Every game gets infinitely simpler the more you play it, but on that note, not all become more fun. In order for me to even want to try to get better at a game, I have to enjoy the experience to even the slightest of degrees. Now, that's the subjective part, because if you think this game is fun enough to come back to, that's just how you felt, and your experience going up from there is logical. In my case, words can't do justice to how much I hated this game. I mean that without hyperbole. I felt like I was trapped in purgatory playing this game, yet I still feel like the script hasn't captured the extent of that feeling. I thought every level sucked and went on for an eternity. I thought every gimmick it introduced was trite and that the game handled like a prison toilet. So needless to say, I'm never playing this game again for the rest of my life. Definitely one of my new least favorite Sonic games, which I guess brings up the discussion of how it ranks compared to other Sonic games I've branded with that title. And I can say this, it's tricky. When looking at this rating system I mentally divide games up with, I think it's a shoo-in for the E tier. However, I hated it enough to where I want to slap that F on it. But like I said when I introduced the F tier in the Sonic Freeriders video, I don't want to go around handing F ranks out like candy. It's reserved for the worst of the worst. Let it be known that I'm still unsure of where I'd actually rank it. Just know that it's one of these bottom two. A truly soul-devouring experience. The biggest shame of all being how this was the note that Dimps went out on for developing Sonic games. This is a company that during the 2000s was seen as one of the few bright spots in terms of Sonic, providing the Game Boy Advance with the excellent Sonic Advance lineup, and the DS with the quality Sonic Rush titles, alongside Sonic Colors on DS, which is more or less a sequel to those. But with their last few games, they were either really mediocre like Generations 3DS and 4 Episode 2, or just trash like Episode 1 and Sonic Lost World. Lost World on 3DS being, like I said, their last Sonic game. If you like this game, more power to you. Reading the comments on my Lost World Wii U review, and by seeing the climate on YouTube, it seems some people do like Lost World 3DS even more than the console version. I personally don't see it, but again, more power to you. I'm pretty sure this version sold more copies than the Wii U version did, kinda like the Wii version of Sonic Unleashed that Dimps also made that went alongside Sonic Team's version. So a lot of people remember this one well. If you are in that camp, feel free to share why below. Since I'm with the seemingly majority in thinking this one was just fundamentally missing the mark. That's pretty much all I can say in regards to this game. I thought it sucked, and I think it's a shame that Dimps didn't get the chance to do another game and maybe redeem the legacy they have left behind in the series in their final few entries. But otherwise, it's not super relevant to the history of Sonic like in 06 or Sonic Boom! Rise of Lyric on Wii U. Now, this video is not about Rise of Lyric. The one I made on that game will certainly suffice. But it's important in talking about how the Boom 3DS games played a part in the history of Sonic to establish that in the mid to early 2010s, Sega worked on a Western Sonic reboot to bring more eyes to the brand and get a new generation into Sonic. This failed spectacularly because they did everything wrong here. From a TV series that was a slower-paced comedy, which wouldn't really do much for the toy-playing demographic, to games that were really not good and merchandise that sold extremely poorly. Rise of Lyric on Wii U being so bad that it tanked Sega and Sonic in ways they're still recovering from to this day. That video covered a lot of ground in regards to what made that game such a spectacular failure, so I say that you should definitely go watch that to get fully caught up. But to cover the major highlights, the game was unstable upon release, a product of it being made for the CryEngine that wasn't fully compatible with the Wii U console. The game was a boring and bland kids game that offered little appeal to Sonic fans and kids as well, with numerous better options out there, and showed a remarkable amount of negligence on Sega's part, letting another disaster game hit store shelves just 8 years after their last one. An attempt to turn a lot of profit that blew up in their face because Rise of Lyric sold terribly, tainting their entire Sonic Boom reboot right out of the gate. Rise of Lyric killed pretty much all the goodwill the brand had bought itself with Sonic Colors and Sonic Generations back in 2010 and 2011 respectively. As with the release of Rise of Lyric, we were shown that they were not committed to only releasing quality products, and we'd still get games like this. Seriously though, if you read what people were saying about Rise of Lyric when it came out, you'd think Colors and Generations never happened and that 06 was the previous game or something, putting the series in a really bad spot. But Rise of Lyric was not the only Sonic Boom game, as on the same day we got that one, Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal launched for the Nintendo 3DS, and it also came out to poor reception. Not the scathing reviews that Rise of Lyric got, but Shattered Crystal skewed negative because of its bloated runtime and overall meh gameplay. It didn't really matter that the game was more finished than Rise of Lyric because the game not being good in the eyes of the public only further damaged the Sonic Boom brand. But as I said last time, I never played this when it came out. Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal was a game that prior to now I had never played at all. Rise of Lyric caught my attention because of its Jak and Daxter-esque art design, so I gave that game a shot and of course hated it and traded it in. But Shattered Crystal was a game that my 14-year-old self was already not interested in because I had decided the developers of it were my arch enemy because they released Sly Cooper Thieves in Time the previous year. Very mature and rational stuff indeed. But when word got out that the game was pretty mediocre, I can't say I felt like I was missing out. I can talk more about this in a video I'm going to do in a few months, but I'll just say for now, Sanzaru Games comes across, to me, as a team of hardworking and fun-loving people. That's the vibe I get from them in the various interviews from them I've consumed in the pre-release of Sly 4 and for this game. So I've got nothing against them. However, upon actually playing Shattered Crystal, yeah, I really didn't like the game. I can sum this up pretty quickly. Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal is a game so boring that I felt my soul gradually leaving my body. I keep referring to games as soul-devouringly boring, and then I review another game a few months later that deserves the title even more. It's happened a ton of times recently. This game is really long, and yet there's not much in terms of total content here. The basic idea of the game is that you run through these stages as Sonic and you gradually unlock more characters throughout the first hour, starting with Tails and then the newcomer for Sonic Boom, Styx the Badger, and finally Knuckles. With all four of them unlocked, you must use their abilities combined to collect crystal fragments and blueprints while trying to reach the end of the stage. Sonic has this dash attack that goes through blue walls, Tails being able to fly over vents on the ground, Styx using her boomerang to hit switches, and Knuckles burrowing underground to reach hidden areas. Each character can be swapped out with a press of the D-pad as the shoulder buttons swap what menus on the bottom screen, from the map to the collectibles tally. In concept, not terrible, but in execution it's just not fun. For starters, the game handles kind of poorly. The controls are simple, A using your enter beam on these grapple points, B is your jump and homing attack, and Y is the sprint button, and X is your special move. However,
The controls of Sonic and Friends feels really slippery as you'll let go of the sprint button and still fall into pits or spikes, and the enter beam never felt very responsive, leaving you open to falling into pits some more. So actually playing as the characters is not fun in this, but then the levels are just loaded up with automation. Several seconds per stage just devoted to watching the characters fly through dash pads, moving through corkscrews and loops with none of the interactivity these elements had in other Sonic games, and that includes the ones that loaded up on dash pads already, like Sonic 4. It's just a flop in this game because, as I said, you entirely surrender control throughout these segments. You don't even have to press the sprint button, the dash pads completely automate the experience. The game has like 5 worlds or so, but not that many levels. This is because the level length is extremely bloated. I spent over 10 minutes or so on the first stage. Regularly, when getting into a new main stage, I'd be there for 8 minutes or more. We all know that handheld games are best enjoyed in short bursts if you're on the bus or in the back seat as a kid or whatever. So I don't know why the levels in this game balloon in length so much. The same goes for Sonic Lost World on 3DS, which I reviewed last month. It's just not fun to be playing a stage and have to keep going and going and going when half of that time is the same 4 puzzles you've been solving all game long and the other half of that's dash pads. But of course, the most infamous aspect of Shattered Crystal is its exploration gimmick. One of the lead designers of this game had said that Metroid was a big inspiration for him, which influenced how their previous game, Sly 4, went about its optional collectibles, which was pretty cool, but this game wears its Metroid influence on its sleeve much more, in ways that I don't believe benefit the Sonic experience. What I mean by Metroid influence is that they have designed the game so that collecting things in the levels is one of the most important aspects of the campaign. They achieve this by locking progression behind a certain number of collectibles. For example, in a stage you can get a token for beating the level, but then another token for finding every crystal, and then another one for every blueprint. To keep playing more stages, you're going to have to scour the levels for all these collectibles, which in practice is more tedious than it sounds. For starters, throughout the early game you don't have all 4 characters, so by the time you unlock them all, you're going to have to go back and replay earlier levels to explore them fully as characters you didn't have before in order to keep making progress. It's not like Metroid where you unlock new moves you need to progress, it's just arbitrarily replaying content in order to unlock more of it in a pretty blatant attempt to extend playtime. It gets really bad because you can't just collect what you missed and leave. Quitting the stage will tell you that all progress will be lost, so you have to play the entire long level again. Say you missed one collectible again, that's another run of the stage you're gonna have to do. I played this factory level several times over and still didn't find everything I was looking for, and in these levels, I don't want to explore since levels have segmented chunks, automated dashpad segments, and points of no return, so it's really hard to enjoy the stages for what they could offer since you always feel like you're missing something. To improve the situation dramatically, you can unlock an upgrade to your map that shows you the locations of blueprints and crystals, and unsurprisingly, this makes the game much less frustrating to play, and I never missed one from then on. But before then, it was hell, never knowing if I was going the right way or retreading the same ground as rings and enemies respawn, and puzzles will lead to shields, or rings, or other worthless things. Even with a map though, I still don't want to play these levels because they're boring for the reasons I said just a moment ago. I feel like making this game fun would involve some simple changes. They don't even have to make more levels, I'd just say divide the levels they have into smaller chunks and make those acts of a zone. This would give the game a better pace, and I'd also say the collecting element should have been entirely optional because yes, the game would be shorter for most players, but that might give the players the desire to come back and replay it instead of feeling like the game was a lengthy slog. And also, do more of these rival races, which were like mini Sonic Rivals levels, but a lot more interesting. If they did that, I'd hold this game in much higher esteem than I currently do. That wouldn't fix my issues with the levels, but it would be a start. As it stands, this is a game I'll probably never play again because it's boring. As I said, I could sum up this game fast, and so I have. The most interesting part of the game is how terrible the writing is. The plot of Shattered Crystal is that Amy gets captured by Lyric, and he's gonna zap her brain to learn of some ancient artifact location, and so Sonic and crew set out to rescue her, running into Shadow and Metal Sonic on the way there. Metal Sonic being the generic boss character he's been for several games now, and Shadow not needing any of that pathetic friendship that Sonic relies on. So, more of the same trash we're used to at this point as well. And that's it for the story. But the writing is truly diabolical. I'm talking several scenes of characters standing around making jokes like how Knuckles should be named Smashels, since that's what he does, or Styx and her tinfoil hat alien conspiracies, or literally making jokes about their plane crashing while they're crashing for 90 seconds straight. Or my favorite example, they rescue Amy before the final boss and Sonic remarks, "So, should we go after him, or should we go get some lunch?" Like, what the heck is going on here? Even some of the critics noted that the writing in this was putrid. So it's not me being some uber-invested fanboy by saying that, it's just the lowest bar kiddie humor, like Lyric saying you can't kick his butt because snakes don't have butts. Very clever. What makes the writing so interesting to me as a topic is how I always feel like this game, or really the whole Boom era, as a turning point in the eyes of many fans.
I already said Rise of Lyric made me think Sonic wasn't for me anymore, but to compound upon that, I'll bring up a series on YouTube I've been talking about for ages in this retrospective, Sonic Dissected. The guy who runs it, Roger, also does funny parody animations of Sonic, and I've brought some of those funny ones up that parodied the dumbest Sonic plots like Sonic Rush or Sonic Rivals in those videos. But his animation on Shattered Crystal was also one of my favorites. It ruthlessly mocked the game's writing style, to the point where when actually playing the game for the first time, I was shocked at how everything he made fun of, like doing stand-up in front of an ancient temple or joking around about nothing while the plane is crashing, are barely even parody. It's just what happens in the game, and that context makes it even funnier.
Evil mustard's fault!
Oh, Sticks! Mustard isn't evil!
I have to use the yoke to steer the plane from crashing.
Yoke? I don't get that yoke.
No! A yoke is like a plane control stick.
Stick? Like sticks?
Funny, we're talking about a stirring stick, while Sticks is here. And egg yolk kinda sounds like...
The ending of this parody animation always stuck out to me. At this point, I was pretty well programmed by all the YouTube videos I watched to believe that the best Sonic games were Sonic 1, 2, CD, 3K, Colors, and Generations, and that the writing of Sonic Colors had saved the series with its humor-based approach. But Sonic Dissected was different from all the other videos on YouTube that I just copied the opinions of verbatim, as they were giving criticism to the stories of Colors, Generations, and Lost World well before it was cool. But then, after making fun of this awful story, Roger cuts back to Black Knight and we see the characters fighting monsters and riding lava waves. It stood out so much because Sonic Dissected used to criticize the stories of Unleashed and Black Knight for valid reasons, like how Sonic just shows up in Black Knight and schools everyone how to be a knight in like 2 days' time. But then you just look back at those games after 4 years of this kind of stuff and think, man, Sonic was pretty cool before. And I don't just mean the console games before that gets brought up. It was pretty cool back in Sonic Advance 3 when Gemerald turned on Eggman and then you get a Supersonic Eggman team-up in the final boss as you defeated Gemerald and see in the ending that Tails made him nice, like Emerald from Sonic Battle, the previous game. It was good continuity and a cool moment. The Sonic Rush games have cool moments as well. Heck, I'd even say Shadow's ending in Sonic Rivals 2 was a neat moment as we see Metal Sonic still has some free will left post-Sonic Heroes. The handheld games used to be extensions of what the console games were doing, which I guess is what Shattered Crystal was, just for the new age direction of Sonic. My point is, a backlash against the 2010s Sonic was growing, and a second look at the 2000s games was also on the rise. These things did not just come out of nowhere. I've made it clear that the Sonic Era Wars is something I no longer want anything to do with, but I bring it up because I want to establish context on how all these things happened as we get back to Forces, the game that inspired my making that Sonic Stories video in 2018. But that pretty much covers Shattered Crystal. It was a mediocre game made worse with its blatant padding, one that only served to make the Boom series look even worse as it had not just one dud, but 2 duds right at the same time as the show began. But this began the Boom drought. The year was 2015. Sonic discussion was pretty lively back in 2013 and 14 as people were hyped to talk about the new games, especially with Boom on the way back in 2014. But following Boom's launch, Sonic discussion online became more of a wasteland. Rise of Lyric and Shattered Crystal were both much worse than anyone could have expected, and the Boom show was already on a path of decline with its early airing times. The media circus that was Rise of Lyric made, I'd say, pretty much everyone sick of Sonic Boom before the year was even over. But Sega couldn't just move on immediately. They put a lot of money into the Boom brand, which really failed, as I said last week. In 2015, we got Sonic Runners, a currently defunct mobile game. And then in 2016, the next time we saw something non-Boom related come out of Sonic was LEGO Dimensions. Real A-game content right there. It just felt like the series had grind to an absolute halt back in 2015. But then we got word on a new game, and it was Sonic Boom, Fire and Ice. Hooray, another Sonic Boom game, a sequel to Shattered Crystal no less. I felt nothing at the announcement of this game because I checked out of Sonic. I didn't care one bit about them continuing to do another game. My mindset was, here's hoping when Sonic Team eventually does a game, it'll be good. Boom is pretty much dead to me. But we ended up dragging things out a little bit longer as Fire and Ice got delayed to 2016 to a collective shrugged shoulders. I mean, if people were sick of Boom by 2015, that was even worse in 2016 because now it's a world where Mania and Forces were announced for 2017. Who cares about Boom anymore? So yeah, this game was the best received Boom title, but who cares? I actually did pick this one up back in 2017 before Mania came out thinking, maybe it was good, and I quickly dropped it because I thought it was quite boring. Playing it now, 6 years later, that's exactly how I felt all over again. Only now, I played the whole thing. Sonic Boom Fire and Ice is like white noise the video game. To its credit, it fixes all my major issues with Shattered Crystal. For example, I thought the character's handling was much tighter, so I felt in control a lot more than I did in the first game. Each world has more levels, with none of them ever running past the 5-minute mark, stages typically being done in about 2 minutes, much more reasonable for a 2D Sonic game. And best of all, the collection element is entirely optional, as it should be. If you want to blast your way through Fire and Ice, you can. If you want to play every stage and get the most of the maps, you also can, showing Sanzaru was willing to take audience feedback and improve on their foundations, which is commendable. The problem is that while Fire and Ice does fix all the things that made Shattered Crystal so not good, it doesn't really add anything to make the game more fun. The major issue with Fire and Ice is that the levels are still just tracks of automation. In fact, I'd say it's worse in the sequel, since without that exploration element being required, most players will see this game go in one ear and out the other, as it plays itself more than half the time. Also introducing this Fire and Ice gimmick that never really elevates beyond the most basic of applications. Fire melts ice, ice turns water into ice, and sometimes you'll need to do this to get through some collapsing ceilings or whatever, but for the most part the usage of this gimmick felt really mundane. Not worthy of the goofy hype it got in the trailer. What happens if you mix fire and ice? Water. Mystery resolved. Even though Fire and Ice is much shorter than the first game and is doing things to improve the pacing considerably, the fact that the approach to the level design hasn't changed that much means that the game is still pretty damn boring at the end of the day. I knew I had to get this script done shortly after playing the game, because I really felt like this is the kind of thing you'd play and forget almost all of before the week is even over. I just felt like when I wasn't watching the gameplay itself, I was doing almost nothing besides running forward. Level is not really doing much of anything in terms of variety. I barely ever switched characters besides them being required, because with 5 characters, the D-pad isn't used for that anymore, so you'd have to touch the screen, and on my, shall we say, setup, I didn't feel like reaching for my mouse to do that repeatedly in a stage, so I just stuck to one character for a long time, and the game didn't really stop me from doing that. Past the part where Tails is unlocked, I don't think I ever used Amy one time, and she's the new playable character you're supposed to be hyped about. But her abilities are never needed, the returning characters function pretty much the same as before, only with minor enhancements like Sonic not stopping dead in the air while doing his air dash, but otherwise it's the same basic puzzles from before, just done again. But looking at how it was made, I don't think Fire and Ice is some abomination, it's just offering very little in terms of gameplay. I think they tried their best. I mean, the art design is neat, giving us levels based on pirates and a haunted house. The game has full voice acting in its in-game cutscenes. The writing in general feels a lot more like the TV series, probably since Pontac and Graff wrote this game and many episodes of the series. And their new CG show-quality cutscenes demonstrate that the team was putting their best foot forward on 3DS, something I think the other ones I've covered never really tried to do. But when the mechanics are this empty feeling, it's hard to give the game more points than that. Although I did notice one thing about these games, and it's that I'm pretty sure Rise of Lyric is just not even canon to the show timeline. Fire and Ice is a sequel to Shattered Crystal. Fire and Ice being confirmed canon to the show as the main villain of the game, Defect goes on to appear in the series following the events of the game. Rise of Lyric was supposed to be the prequel to the cartoon, but Rise of Lyric and Shattered Crystal can't both be canon since Lyric has an entirely different motivation in both games, and both games showing how the heroes met Lyric. Seriously, Lyric had never met Sonic and friends in Shattered Crystal, but them meeting is how he was freed in Rise of Lyric, so it just doesn't make sense. Shattered Crystal also got a prequel comic in the Sonic Boom Archie books, so I feel like, in a way, Rise of Lyric was just disowned from the Sonic Boom brand before it was even released. Although generally speaking, I feel like it's weird to see the Boom cast in all 3 of these games being involved with some serious adventures, since the show is just nothing like that as we see their misadventures at home. Even with Shattered Crystal's awful writing, I mean, Amy gets captured because she decided to joke about how dumb Lyric is with Sonic on the phone mid-fight. It's still some epic quest that you'd never actually see on the series. But at this point, I'm just rambling about the continuity and presentation of the long-dead 2010 Sonic cartoon series. So I should probably quit while I'm ahead, and say that's pretty much it for the video. Fire and Ice just isn't worth any more time in 2022 than what I've given it. It's really not bad, it's just very dull, very in one ear and out the other. Whatever expression you want to use to describe it, it just doesn't have any staying power. And like I said when introducing it, most people at the time are ready to move on from Boom and just get to the games announced at the 25th anniversary party, Sonic Mania and Sonic Forces, having something new and interesting to play and talk about. With Fire and Ice releasing by the time Boom was really a husk, it just didn't grab the interest of a lot of people. It was too little too late by this point. The Boom brand was blown day one, so 2 years later an okay, I guess, sequel wasn't going to do anything. And that's that. At this point, older Sonic fans had Sonic Mania to look forward to, and this Sonic Forces, or at the time, Project Sonic 2017, looked like it was going back to that energy the younger, older Sonic fans were looking to see again as well. And yeah, following these videos, I did cover Mania, Forces, and then Frontiers right as it released, and you can see all those videos on my channel if you feel curious. Today's episode is a way to go down memory lane and also give myself more time to work on some pretty major projects coming up that I think will be really cool, while also making sure the channel still had content. But if you're new, I hope you enjoyed it. Whether you are new or saw these videos when they first came out, I'll say the same thing I always do. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.